All right, there we go. Good evening, YouTube. It has been a while due to some scheduling issues and my internet going out a few times. We are finally back and on the program here. I'm with Duff. Duff, go ahead and say hello.
Hey everyone, how are we doing this week?
So we are finally back in action, and I'm kind of glad because everything's been going lightning speed recently, and sometimes it's good to miss a week or two just to not have everything be repeated at you. But just in case you're living under a rock and don't know what's been happening, thus far the current hubbub has been about the nomination and now confirmation of a new Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh. He's now been confirmed and has been doing a few good things. We can get into that later. But with that, there has been backlash, and now there is a big run for the leaders of the Democratic Party to try and get voters out there to say, hey, we do not agree with what's been happening. And as can be seen on TV and on YouTube, and hopefully many people already know, there has been many riots and mobbing going about that people are getting angry about the results, and now the Democratic leaders are calling for not necessarily violence, but to get in the face of other voters and Republicans, say, hey, we don't like what's going on, which isn't a great idea. There's been a recent video on CNN where a woman, I can't remember her name, I think its last name is Baldwin, she was trying to calm down nerves and say that rioting and mobs aren't happening. But I don't know, I feel like people knocking on doors is definitely mob outrage kind of thing. Duff, I don't know, would you say that the mobbing is definitely happening right now?
Yeah. Are there lots of people, relatively speaking, at these gatherings? Do there appear to be people being hired to agitate for political reasons? Yeah, absolutely. So if we're going to call that a mob, we can definitely say that they are, because they're motivated to do something. They're not necessarily going about it in either a peaceful or a passive sort of way. So it's like, it's hard to call someone or a group of people a mob when they go to the White House lawn and sit on it and don't do anything besides that, except for say what they're saying and maybe wave a few signs. But pounding on doors, pushing through stuff, having to be removed from areas and trying to force your way in, those all seem like mob-like behaviors. So yeah, sure, let's use the M word.
I see. Well, and then, to be fair, I think there have been some, times where and I'm going to say the word just because it's been, there have been times where they have gotten physical and kind of thing. So are you, I guess, so you're saying that the grouping of people is bad, but since they're not doing a whole lot, is kind of the why you wouldn't consider a mob. So if they were to actually do more damage, then would they be more mob-like to you, I guess?
Oh no, I'm saying that what we've seen, particularly around what was happening in the Supreme Court and the Senate confirmation hearings, that does appear to be mob-like stuff. Absolutely. The difference I say from in my head between a mob or a protest, because you can't have a mob at a protest kind of thing, is that generally a protest is a place is a group of people. They go to a certain area and they have a certain agenda, but they're not actually doing anything to instigate violence. They're trying to raise awareness for something, but they're also not trying to force their way into things, right? So you can have a peaceful sit-in where you literally walk into an open office and you all sit down and you refuse to go. That's not really a mob behavior, because you're not kicking in the door of the place which you're going to go and do your sit-in at, right? Whereas if you all show up and force your way into something, or you all show up and you attack somebody, or aggressively, let's say, or aggressive towards people of the other side, that's more like a mob-like behavior. So the difference between, let's say, protesting the Trans Mountain Pipeline here in Canada, where you show up and you say, we don't want this pipe going through, versus going to, once again, the Supreme Court building and actually trying to force your way into a proceeding that's underway, and one that technically your representatives aren't barred from. So there are Democrats inside. What do you figure they're doing besides trying to get what you want? And if the system is against you, but not unjustly so, protesting through aggressive means with a large number of people is definitely mob-like behavior.
Right, and hopefully they actually one day come to the senses, even though I doubt that'll happen anytime soon. which is just
Well,
a bit ridiculous.
this is something which we touched on in the pre-show there, AAA. Um, it's really hard to figure out just how many people are feeling motivated to take to the streets in this manner. Just because in a country of 338 million, a minority or a small group of people could literally number in the hundreds of thousands. But that's still a small number of people. In fact, the idea, so if we go all the way back to the Women's March 2 years ago, and it's like, oh, 3 million women showed up. And it's like, well, that's great. But at the same time, that's still, out of the population of women in America, let's say it's a little over half of your total population. So let's say it's about 158 million. 3 million out of 158 million isn't even 1%, right?
That's true. That's true.
And so it really becomes hard to determine what's going on. I think the slightly more insidious thing is that sources like the Daily Wire and others have basically said and found that some of these protesters, especially the more aggressive ones, were hired to be there. So literally, they're part of a special interest group. They get called up. They get like an allowance for being out on the street. They probably get food and nice little sandwiches and little drinkies. And they're standing in place of what would be, let's say, a more legitimate protest.
Okay, that's fair, because I think you've even heard in the past where they say, "Oh yeah, well, what's your sign say? I hate XYZ, and insert, whoever there." So I would definitely do, I can agree with the fact of people just kind of go, "Yep, I'm here, and here's my sign, and I'm paid to get angry," and that kind of thing. So that's, I think you're right about that. And I guess so. And this is kind of, would you say that's the majority of the craziness, if that's fair to say?
Yeah, I don't honestly know, because it's this third-hand viewing. So as someone who is, let's say, closer to what's going on, what's sort of your read on this, AAA?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, on the one hand, it's very annoying because we had a very good reason to believe the, Kavanaugh and all the kind of fun stuff was, a meddling with a process. And because people didn't get their way, they wanted to go and make sure that they trumped up some charges, say, hey, this guy is not as clean as you think. No evidence behind that. And then as soon as we go, oh, hey, we think there's being something fishy going on, he's like, oh, no, you're just awful. And we're kind of getting tired of that. So it's getting very annoying to see all this stuff happen. And I guess the only good news now is the fact that the leaders of the party that are like, yeah, we don't like you, are not really being too shy about, yep, we don't like you, here's what we're gonna do, you don't do what we want you to do, and we're gonna go and scream and yell and slap things like that to get what we want. And at least on the one hand, finally we're having some backbone of the party or something like to say, hey, you're ridiculous, we're not gonna take this anymore. So that's good news, but the bad news is I don't think there are good solutions to solve the problem. And for example, I mean, honestly, it's hard to say, I hate you because you don't agree with me, and so we can't sit down and go, hey, you know what, you're reasonable, let's talk. You can't do that. At the same time, if you yell back, well, are you just as worse as that person? So is it worth walking away? All that kind of fun stuff. And I mean, so I guess on the one hand, you want to ignore people and say, okay, you're crazy, live your life, I don't care. On the other hand, these people can actually affect what you do in your day-to-day. So I guess, then there's the question of, is ignoring them going to do us any good? Or is it a situation where, hey, you know what, I don't think what what you're doing, and I want to prove it to you, so let's do the things you say, and when it blows up in our face, we'll change our ways, even though that might not be the case either way. So I guess I don't know, are either good solutions, or is it better to just kind of vote your way to a right answer, if that makes sense?
So ultimately, you never want to assume that the other side is so far beyond the pale that they are unreachable. And you also don't want to assume that your side is so completely rational that there's nothing wrong with the position which you're taking. And I think essentially what you reach out for, especially in the context of what was going on around the judicial nominations, is say, hey, if you believe that justice needs to be fair and equitable, it's totally okay to protest and try and raise awareness for sexual assaults. That's all good, and we're all good that way. But this is not a criminal proceeding, and the alleged victim isn't actually trying to make it into one. And as a psychology professor, she's making two very dubious claims. A, that lie detector tests are actually useful or indicative of something, and B, that somehow the relative intensity of a particular memory preserves the content of that memory entirely, when we know that's not the case. So you would say to them, based off of those two things, would you rather have justice where, and a law which says, okay, we can't prove anything, and because we can't prove anything, we can't say that the person is guilty. On the face of it, because we don't know if anything happened, maybe, just maybe, it's all right to limit your protest to this is a bad precedent and we can get behind that. But the idea that you can say someone is guilty simply by looking at them, that doesn't hold water, and it shouldn't for you guys either, because you don't want to have someone point at you and go, you're guilty, any more than anyone else. So I think it really does come down to, you have to talk to the people who are willing to listen so they can turn around and talk to the people who might be slightly less willing to listen. So the idea that it's somehow all or nothing, I'm not on that boat yet, especially considering my cynicism towards just how these protesters managed to show up in the numbers that they did, and whether or not that they were hired. Because as per usual, the majority of people are silent on most issues because they have other things to do. And you're not really speaking to the protesters so much as you're speaking to that silent majority for one side or the other. And because you don't know what's going on there, you never want to just say, oh, well, they're done. Just let them vote the way they're going to vote. It's like, no, you have to keep on making your arguments, and you have to make sure that they're good arguments and valid arguments, right? And if you can do that, ideally, not always, because there's never a perfect solution, ideally you can actually reach out to a lot of people who you might otherwise have thought were beyond what you could communicate.
No, that's fair. So start with those you have. Well, I guess then I guess that's kind of the catch-22, because the people you know that are differing with you, the issue is then, okay, if I know you have strong feelings that are, against me, and you're yelling about them, then there's a good shot that you're not going to want to be reasonable. At the same time, if you are a person who probably would want to talk about that stuff but are very scared to vocalize it, then how do we attract people to say, you know what, I don't agree with this, but let's talk about that. So it's a bit of a, I mean, I get what you're saying. Is there, so maybe the better solution is to find a way to say, I disagree, but willing to talk, and somehow get those silent majorities out and about, and try to get them into the fresh air. I guess that's kind of where you're going with this.
Yeah, but also to realize that although let's say the Kavanaugh hearing is the thing which was in the news, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the thing that's going to motivate people to vote one way or the other. People tend to already have an established way of thinking about how they're going to vote. So what you're really fighting over are sort of the people who are more undecided. And if you can take it out of the context of what's hot in the media right now and try and look at it more holistically as a country, you could probably actually convince a lot more people to go like, well, look, our economy is actually doing pretty well. According to statistics, race relations are doing pretty well. And internationally, as Nikki Haley said, other people might not like what America's doing, but they respect what America's doing. And that's not necessarily a bad way to be. And sort of use the wider picture, not just the singular issue, to be what's convincing. Because if it always comes down to what's hot, what's in the news right now, you would have no idea about all the good things which are happening within the country. And that's what they have to keep the eyeballs off of. So you need to kind of be aware and advocating for a wide variety of things while being aware of what's hot right now, but not focusing solely on it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a good solution, or at least the start of a solution. But since you brought her up, I'm imagining you've heard the news about Nikki Haley, correct?
Yeah, so she's stepping down from the chair, sorry, from her position as ambassador to the UN. So, AAA, what's your take on that?
Well, I was surprised, definitely. I thought that she has done a very good job. I really like what she has done, who she's been talking to, how she's been saying, and that kind of thing. So I definitely like her being there. I am sad to see her leave. We were still not really sure about. I've been told, or some rumors have been that she just wants a break. And given what she's been through, yeah, I can get that. But I guess it's been a little weird. Apparently, there have been some reports that she just kind of suddenly said, "I want to go." So there's that. I do hope that at some point, when she has taken a break from all this craziness, she gets to come back and does a different position, and then working wherever she wants to be. I mean, Trump basically said, "Hey, you've got your dream job here, so whatever you want." So that's very sad to hear. But there's other speculation. Oh, hey, she's angry with certain people, and other people don't like her, so it's kind of a get out of our face kind of deal. But yeah, I like her. I wish her the best, and I'm sad to see her leave. It'll be, uh, I'm not sure who else is up for the position. I can't really make heads or tails out of who the better successor would be. But I don't know what are your thoughts there, Duff?
Um, so there, I'll start with this. When it comes to any sort of bureaucracy, large scale bureaucracy, there's always those who are going to try and work from within the system, and there's those who will work from outside of the system. And you need the system to have people working within it in order to make it function. But that can give rise to sort of a backroom politicking where you scratch my back, I scratch yours, and that's just the way business goes. So you might be dealing with, let's say, a country that has a less than stellar human rights record, but you might actually be advocating for things that they want because they've been scratching your back. Whereas Nikki Haley, in her role, was very much that second category, the outsider who's drawing attention to the oddities of the insider way of doing things. And the idea that just because the insiders want to go some way or have figured out how they want to orientate how the UN is going to deal with things, that's necessarily good. And so it's been interesting to watch her call out the UN on the nature of how it runs itself, especially considering a lot of her complaints can literally be aimed towards the fact that the UN is very much a globalist institution, of course, but a globalist institution that doesn't actually seem to crack down on its member states, because many of the countries that have problematic human rights records actually have leadership positions in things like the Human Rights Council and other things going on. So it's patently absurd, and no one was saying anything because it's like, oh, we'll go along to get along. So Nikki Haley, I think, served a very important job in trying to point out that the UN has its issues, and a lot of the time it can fly under the radar. And with her disappearing, we probably won't get as much of a focus on someone with an alternative viewpoint from within the UN, simply because as an American ambassador, you will automatically get more cameras on you. Whereas if you're like the Polish ambassador or the Czech ambassador or the Slovakian or the Slovenian ambassador, who are saying very similar things, they will get no play whatsoever just because their countries are below notice. So it's kind of a double loss in that way.
Is there anyone you can think of right now that you'd say, hey, I want them to go too, or is this kind of is she kind of not irreplaceable, but it's going to be hard to take on that role, maybe?
Okay, let's see about this. Wire.com. What's his name? Just to drive Ben Shapiro up the wall, I'm going to say Michael Knowles.
Well, that might actually no. To be fair, I think that might be interesting because that at least get Michael Knowles out of Ben's hair. So maybe it's two birds with one stone, right?
Yeah,
Potentially be a
And I'd
Like a
love
good
to see an
idea.
ambassador smoking a cigar in the UN.
I just want to see all of the, oh guys, you think you've got your stuff together? We're the U.S. So here's how it's gonna be. So it'd be very interesting to see his uh, what he would say to all of them in your face, haha, whatever kind of deal. That'd be an interesting role there. That would be actually there was an episode of the show. I don't know if you saw that where they were asking Ben about who, if he were president, who he would make of the other cabinet positions because he had Michael Knowles, Andrew Clavin, Crowder was in there, the whole lineup of people, and which was very very humorous as well. Um, but and I guess with that being said, I don't know. Is there a uh, should is would it be good in the future to for the U.S. to say, hey, you know what, we don't necessarily need to be, or I guess so. The question is then with Nikki Haley leaving, maybe is should we reevaluate our uh, partnership or membership in the organization? Is it worth the U.S. to kind of we don't need you guys, you don't need us, or you need us, we don't need you, so goodbye? Is that worthwhile?
No. So the thing here, and thing you have to be careful about, is that a big figure is somehow bigger than the position. And the fact is that even though the UN might not be what a lot of people want it to be, it still is the primary means through which the international community can communicate. So it is important to have a UN ambassador there, just so as much as it's important to have a Canadian ambassador and a British ambassador, because at least communication can occur. You're losing a firebrand, but the thing is, the U.S. still is basically the single greatest power in the UN in terms of Security Council and other stuff. So the US stepping out of it is not necessarily good for the world, but it's also not really good for the UN either, because as I said earlier, without the US being the contrarian view, all those other member states which have alternative viewpoints don't get any focus from the media. So it's not worth just throwing up your hands and be like, if Nikki Haley can't be it, then nobody can. We should just, take our toys and go home. Rather, it might just be you take somebody with a slightly different take and you actually learn from what Nikki Haley was saying, where she's like, I'm pretty much exhausted. I have to be aware of so many different things at once, and they're always trying to hide things and run the committee meetings at odd times, kind of thing. So it's like maybe get the ambassador a better team and try and be a little bit more forward in keeping tabs on what's going on. Because the thing is, the UN building is in New York City still. And it's not that hard to get Americans into New York.
That's true. That's true. Well, maybe a better way to fix things is to, would you say maybe revamp the UN? Is that fair to say?
Possibly. But ultimately, that's a really complicated question. And it kind of has a history of the fact that most international bodies eventually become redundant to the international community, because as with everything, the world is always changing and always developing, and what might have worked as a solution for administration in the past might not work so well now, and hence why you see things with the EU having significant problems right now. The League of Nations, of course, went belly up because no one really respected it, and the UN is kind of running into exactly the same problem because it has all these purviews, but it doesn't really have any power to make what it wants stick, because that's a good thing. But so maybe what the UN should simply become is a place for nations to get together and talk about things, with less to do with all these smaller interest sectors and committees. But who knows? What are your thoughts on that? So two things with that, AAA. What are your thoughts on Nikki Haley leaving? And what do you think made her such a good ambassador? And if you were to replace the UN, what would you replace it with?
Yes, I'll miss Nikki Haley. She was great. She deserves a break, definitely. I hope that they can find a great replacement. I did enjoy her I mean, I thought that, while she was there, she had a lot of great lines about, "Hey, we're doing this thing, and if you're not gonna join us, we are gonna remember who did this and who did that, and what your stance is and who really helped, because when you call us in a time of need, we will have a checklist, so we'll see what happens there." So she called them out, which is great. I again, not saying that someone else can't do it, but just the way she did it, her persona, how she said, how she acted, her fearlessness. Um, Again, not to go there, but since we have different cultures, having a female do that was, that was a big deal. If it was a guy, like a little less, but she stood strong. I don't want to use the Iron Lady phraseology, but she definitely, stood her ground, which looked really cool, which was really great. But anyway, so yes, definitely good on her. To reevaluate and to I don't know, say revamp, replace, whatever word we can use, to make the UN more useful. I think, like anything I would say about government-wise stuff now, I don't think it should be, let's burn it all down, salt the ground, and move on. That's too far. I definitely think that there needs to be a different priority with how it is used. I agree. It's definitely a great place to go to and communicate with other country and say, hey, good, bad, ugly. Here's what we need to do. Let's talk about all of our policies and let's make sure that we can agree and we are here to communicate and not cause trouble. We need to have communication going on, but there are like any government source, whatever you want to call that. There's a lot of wasted time, wasted efforts, wasted resources going on. So maybe a different solution would be to say, hey, this is to have a direct line out in the open of concerns we have. And there's a lot of departments here that attempt to help out, but in reality, we should reevaluate what's actually working and not. And so, not to say in the future, but it'd be interesting to say, hey, one country calls another country, says, hey, I'm having a problem, guys. Can I get some help? Or, even say, hey, we have a problem here. We think that here is some proof to show here is a party that might be uh, an issue or acting in acting against us. I don't want to say that you're meaning to, but here's how it's being taken. Defend yourself, and we want to get this resolved. So almost a debating platform, maybe. Again, not sure if that'd be the best idea, but if we're gonna communicate with each other, then we have to be open and honest about what's going on. And then, I mean, that's kind of what happened to Russia. They got kicked out. So, a difference. We need to, I think, reform the platform, if you will, and make sure that it's actually being used to help all people, as opposed to, oh hey, I need help me out. I guess does that last part make sense? If you get what I'm
The
saying.
only clarification I'd give there, Triple, is Russia didn't get kicked out of the UN. They only got kicked out of the G8.
Oh, okay. And it's been a while, and so yes, I might be miss. Yes, fair enough. I definitely that's been a while. Probably should read up on that again, but yes, they definitely were not happy to be there. So or not happy to be had there. Um, but yeah, I think having the debate and communication. I don't know. You think that's a better start, maybe?
Yeah, potentially. And I think what we're both saying is essentially that so the UN exists as a vehicle, but what exactly it does and how they do it is not exactly clear. And it becomes hard to take it seriously as a force for, let's say, potential good in the world, simply because, as I said earlier, it's such an old thing and it operates with its own sort of bureaucratic networks that you get the opinion that you can't talk about these things. And that you can't talk about things forcefully, because you can just show up and yell at the UN, as world leaders do, or show up and get lauded by the UN, as some celebrities do. And you go, but what exactly is going on here? Because ideally, the UN should not have ulterior motives, right? It should be a vehicle for those debates and for those discussions between nations. And sometimes it has to be unpopular because it'll be like, okay, we actually have to support the little guy because otherwise nobody will. Or sometimes we have to support the big guy, because even though they might be perceived as a bully, they might be right in this case. And that's not something which we see. And so you have all these question marks over what is it that the UN actually does, and who are they accountable to, and why is it that it seems to be able to, countries seem to be able to manipulate what the UN is doing, and the UN also seems to have its own ulterior motives for how it functions, all of which hurt what should be a meeting place for nations to try and discuss how to go about making the world a better place. So yeah, at least that's how I think about it. Is that kind of where you were at there, AAA?
I think that's fair. And again, there are too many. As you said, there's a lot of things that are going on that we know and don't know, and there are many facets. And it's not a okay. Here's the quick fix. That doesn't exist, and there's too many. Oh well, when you do this thing, then these 5 million things get changed and stuff. So that's the hard part. But I think that you and I agree on communicating and having it all out there, and I guess the phrase "more information is good" can be a bad thing, but at least having the voice and people saying, "Hey, getting attention to people and issue is the best idea." So that's I think that's fair to say. But actually, I don't know why I thought of this now since we were talking about communication there too. Um, there is a since we're discussing the debating tactic, given everything that's been going on, all the craziness there, since November is coming up, and we keep hearing about this big blue wave, as an outsider, are you having any more? Have predictions changed on your end, given all the craziness here, or is your mind kind of still at the same, blue wave stuff? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't actually know enough to be very insightful in this. The only things which I can say is traditionally the opposition party tends to make gains in the midterms. And normally it's just because you want to counterbalance potential supermajorities. However, what does appear to have gone on, if you just sort of look at, let's say, several factors, the circus that gets made out of anything that President Trump does, but a circus that doesn't really seem to lead anywhere. The relative stability of the American economy and how it's doing, and good job numbers and other stuff, and the fact that the Democrats have been called out rightfully of having senators and congresspeople essentially saying it's all right to harass the other side and to use mob-like tactics to attack them. This might motivate a lot of, or a sizable chunk of, undecideds or Republicans who might not have gotten out to vote to go and do that. And what we might see is sort of an ameliorating effect. So less of a swing. So there might indeed be a wave, but it might also meet another wave. And what could happen is that you end up with exactly what we have now. like so nothing changes, or it changes so microscopically. Now, is there a good predictor about that? I don't know. And I don't know if you can get those numbers until the polls start showing up. I know that some democratically leaning people that I've talked to recently, they're like, oh, well, look at all these states that used to be Republican and all these governorships are up. Surely they'll all switch to Democrat. And it's like, well, how do you know that? Well, because the Democrats are better. And it's like, oh, I don't know. Like, a lot of these states seem to be benefiting quite a lot from having had Republican governors. So I have a feeling most likely it will be like normal, in that there will be seats which shift to the other side. But I don't think there will be as many as what people might have predicted back in June.
Yeah, that's fair to say. And things had not been going well, pre-Kavanaugh. I think it was definitely you saw an easy take of the House and potential wavering of the Senate. So that was definitely there. Post Kavanaugh, the polls have been shown that I've seen from I think it was Real Clear Politics, and I think 538, even though I'm not sure if that's the name of the site. They have been saying that there is a lot of people angry about, as we discussed before, oh, hey, you know what? You did this thing. Oh, really? Where's the evidence? You did it. You have to believe because reasons. So that being the call to arms by several leaders has really pushed people away. So maybe the hope would be, yes, there's a very good potential that the Republicans lose the House. There's also a potential that they keep the Senate. Or there's even a case where, as you said, nothing happens. Or there's a case where there's actually gains for the Republicans in both parties, or House and Senate. So that is a possibility. It will depend on how awful things go. And like I said, with all the quote unquote mobs happening, I think that there is a good case to be made that people are gonna, it's gonna be hard to miss the, oh yeah, I keep seeing these mobs do some stuff, and it's not the you can only spin the news so much, I think. Once you have people going, "Oh yeah, well, you're getting punched in the face," and even people say, "Oh yeah, that's your imagination." Well, people aren't gonna just sit there and keep getting punched in the face. So I think that we're losing the imagination. Oh, everything is either great or terrible. People are gonna realize, okay, you can say what you want to say, but my eyes aren't lying to me. So here's what's really going on. And actually, there was a commercial I just saw on Facebook that was I think it was called Leftist Unhinged, and just, Democrats like, oh yeah, well, here's what the mob does, and here are people unhinged, and here's what's all happening. Here's why you must vote our way. But the next few clips are literally the mobs of people at the hearings and knocking down on doors and getting physical, and it's they're not hiding anymore, and that's the key. So to see what the um, I think it's very telling about, here's an example of, we say these things are happening, here are these things actually happening. And actually, just that was really fun. I don't know if you heard the story. There was a protest going on, and I think his name is, no, I can't remember his name. There was a male feminist, and he was talking to a pro-lifer, and he actually kicked the pro-lifer. Anyway, I say that because in the commercial, the oh, I can't remember his position. He was the quote unquote Obama's wingman. And he said, I know Michelle says when they go low, we go high. No, when they go low, we kick them. And it plays that clip. And I'm like, that was perfect. That couldn't have been. That was
Well,
awesome.
what's kind of ironic about that is, of course, the kicking incident actually happened here in Canada, in Toronto. So the guy who you're talking about was the former head of the Justice Department under Obama.
I think, yeah, something in those lines, yeah.
Yeah, but so it's one of those ones where Thomas Sowell is correct when he talks about the two different ideologies of the. So one is the ideology of the benighted. So whatever we believe is correct, and because it's correct, therefore whatever we do is justified, even if it means we do terrible things, like kicking a woman because she believes that a kid or a fetus should not be aborted. Versus the what's the other view for some, the tragic view of humanity, which is that we will keep on trying to work to do our best, but we're always going to fall short in some way. But that means that we just have to keep on working, right? And so for the guy who ends up kicking this woman, well, I don't know what you're trying to prove there. Other than that, if you roundhouse kick someone who is not expecting it, who is lighter than you, you're going to injure them. And that maybe, just maybe, you should never have been taught how to throw a roundhouse kick, because clearly you don't understand the discipline behind martial arts. So it's like, people who know how to fight should never have to. And if you're attacking someone who is not physically trying to harm you, well, then you're the aggressor and you should go to jail, right? Versus, of course, this Democratic representative, he's being cheeky, but once again, it speaks to the ideology and the mindset of the benighted. It's like, whatever we do is okay because, of course, history is on our side. And it's like, but that doesn't or shouldn't be giving you a blank check to say or do whatever you want. You could very much say, it's like, look, When it comes to fighting against the Republican Party, we have to be aggressive in how we pursue what we're doing, but we also have to be smart about it. And if he said that, that's totally great. But this idea is like, oh yeah, we're going to kick him in the face. It's just like, well, because someone has been kicked recently, that's probably a bad way of parsing those words.
Yeah, that's true. So I mean, again, that's like I said, the interesting part is they're not hiding anymore. Um, and we're seeing actually, I don't know if you saw this. There was a recent no, okay, so I caution myself saying recent because the news moves so fast nowadays. What's recent? But I did hear there was some article talking about how the Democrats want to start having debates like this or next year for the presidency in 2020. I don't know if you heard that story, but that was I was like, oh, you guys are all like getting on the wagon. So now it went from having too many Republicans to having every Democrat senator wanting to go and try to make their way. I don't know how if you saw that story, but I thought that was um, crazy to see uh, so many people wanting to get on the ticket. Have you seen that article by chance?
So are they wanting to have nominee debates? Is that what you're saying with AAA?
I think it was something in the lines of they wanted to have debates with anyone who wanted to run for the presidency in the Democratic side.
I don't really see that as being an issue, but I think the bigger problem is the Democrats are going to have to do something to ensure that what happened with Donna Brazile and Bernie Sanders, as well as the nomination between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, somehow does not rear its head again in this series of debates. So it's like you might actually end up having a populist candidate who once again gets punted at the very last moment. And that's not good, because even though you might disagree with the populist candidate, if you're on the other side, the fact that most people want that in the party should be justification enough to get that person in, barring any other circumstances. So what I think we will most likely see is a bunch of attempts at a debate, because I don't actually think any of the Democratic leadership has shown that they're particularly gifted in debating. A lot of them are very good at ad hominem, and if they want to start ad hominem one another, that would be hilarious. But the other thing, which is going to be absolutely knock your socks off funny, is the fact that because all of them are on board with the victimology index and the progressive stack, it means that we already know who the Democratic candidate should be. And that would be a woman who hopefully might be transgendered and of a non-white origin. So if they can find that person, they've already got the candidate.
You wouldn't think they'd want to go and just have their king of the hill, Mr. Sanders? That wouldn't be the default?
Bernie can't. He's a white old guy.
Ironically enough, yes.
So I'm not sure if I'm completely serious with that, but the rhetoric has changed. The rhetoric has changed from the last election. And so you have to be aware of that. And Bernie actually doesn't seem to be sitting in a place where he can benefit from the PR of the particulars of the Democratic Party as it stands. And that's just the nature of politics. Things shift. Now, could Bernie somehow manage to work it back towards himself? Yeah. But if someone called him out on it and go, hey, Bernie, you say that, we need alternate voices, and you happen to be a white old guy, don't you think there should be other alternate voices? And he'd probably be like, oh, yeah, of course. Maybe we should get whatever Cortez to take my position.
That would be the next person up. Sure. Well, I guess my question is, everyone seems so similar, and that was the issue with Republicans. Do you see the senators and nominees being different enough to say, hey, I want to do this, as opposed to, well, you guys are saying the same thing? Or do you think that they would be creative to say, well, but I want it to be this way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it will be tough. I think you're quite right. It will be tough to see how they differentiate themselves on anything besides victimology, right? And I have a feeling that a lot of male Democratic candidates are actually going to find a lot of trouble with trying to make any headway when it comes to that, because of course they have to pay lip service to it, and they have to pay lip service to the idea of institutional racism, institutional bias, right, and implicit bias. And so you go, oh, well, I who am posited to be the problem of all these things because of my genitalia, uh, believe that I should be in charge anyways. And that's not really a particularly strong argument. So I have a feeling if it comes to debates, you're probably going to see some Democrats coming back towards the center, because at least there they can start arguing other things and being saying like, hey, this is a good idea, but you've taken it to such an extreme that it's no longer useful because you're tarring and feathering people before they even get a chance to speak. But they might tar and feather them before they get to speak. So yeah, as I say, I have a feeling that the next candidate will most likely be a woman of a non-white ethnicity who might be transgendered and has a high victimology index.
Oh, so you're saying the next person is going to be a man. Okay, cool. Yes, I think that's fair to say. Well, actually, and so when it comes down to it, maybe the best would you say that the only real way, or not real, the best thing or one of the best tactics that can be used on the right would be to make sure a candidate can defend themselves against character attacks? Does that think that's a good, potentially a best defense?
The problem becomes, what do you mean by defend themselves against character attacks? Because literally Donald Trump's defense is, don't care, right? And that might not be the most consistent type of thing that you want going beyond this election cycle, let's say. At some point, you do want somebody to be able to say, look, if I was a teenager, I did teenage things. If I came up from this particular background, and I probably did things related to that particular background, and I don't regret it, but we did it. And if you're going to hold me to a standard which is so puritanical that no one can really stand to it, that doesn't really work. So I'd rather have someone have a blunt answer to that, as opposed to what the previous potential nominees for the Republican Party did, where they're like, oh, well, I'm better now. Or, well, I don't know what to say to that. And Trump, who's like,
Well, right, and so the question is then, how do you debate irrational? Because would you debate irrational with rational, or just, oh, you're wrong and I don't care, and what about the time you did this thing? Like, how are these debates gonna be slap fights? Is that the future of our political system?
I should hope not, right? But the thing is, when you say do you debate the irrational with rational, yeah, absolutely. But you also need to realize the limitations of that. So oftentimes where politicians have the most trouble is when they try to overstate their case, right? So, for example, Senator Cruz, when he was running, well, sadly, Senator Cruz is not the most photogenic guy. And Trump attacked him rather viciously. And Senator Cruz was like, oh my, this is so improper. When really he could have been like, so this guy actually has to dig up dirt on my dad to get at me. It's like, wouldn't it be nice if he actually had something to say about me and my position, and leave it at that, right? Because the more you go down the rabbit hole, the worse off you're going to be. And that seems to be the problem of the people who want to fight irrationality with rationality, is they go way too far down the sort of nihilistic hole. They need to know when to call quits.
Sounds like you're saying we need to start training the Republican candidates to know how to fight, not irrationally, but just know how to fight better, I guess. Is that kind of where you're going?
Well, not just the Republicans, all politicians, right? You want the politicians to be the best at what they do.
Well, sure, but again, that's the thing with, okay, here's the policy, okay, great, and then there's the other argument of, well, you argued policy, I'm going to argue character. Well, what wins the debate, character or policy? That's the toss-up, right?
Yeah, but as we sort of alluded to there, AAA, you can train people for that. So you can totally train them to be like, well, hey, you're going after my character, but is that because you can't talk policy? Bring it, fool, right? So it's knowing how to situate where you're going and avoiding putting up a smokescreen, because oftentimes when it comes to policy versus character, if someone goes after character, they try and set 30 fires, and then this person's running around trying to put them out, instead of blanket statement going like, wow, look, you attacked me on 12 fronts. Let's actually talk about policy. And not losing yourself trying to fight all those little battles. So you need to be able to figure out what the goal is and stay on message. But beyond that, not just speak on message and appear like you're a bobbing head, because that happens too. And that's one of the things with Hillary, is Hillary's a terrible debater because she tries to stay purely on message and then attack the other person, but her message isn't very deep and it isn't very compelling.
Right, no, that makes sense. Well, I guess, was there, minus what Trump was doing, and I guess since we're discounting Mr. Cruz, would you say that I guess, who would you guess would have been was the best debater on the Republican end of this past year?
Nobody.
Oh, wow, okay. Well, I guess that's fair to say.
So literally, Trump ended up being the best simply because he knew his game so well and the others couldn't adjust to it, right? And it's kind of like there's still that problem. So, oh shoot, who is the Republican senator who went on the NBC, sorry, it was CNN news special to talk about the shooting which happened in Florida? Rubio. So Marco Rubio still has this problem. Alex Jones showed up at an event, and Alex Jones is like, hey, that's like Senator Rubio, right? And Rubio's like, I don't know you. It's like, yeah, right. You don't know Alex Jones. If you don't know Alex Jones, that's a real problem. If you do and you just don't want to talk to him and that's your defense, that's a problem. And then he's like, oh, what, you going to call security? And Rubio goes, no, I can take you for myself. And Alex Jones goes, oh my God, he threatened me with physical violence. And Rubio's like, oh, no, I didn't. And it's like, no, you did. And this is the problem, is they don't seem to know how to play in the game. So what should have happened? Oh, Senator Rubio, hey, aren't you Alex Jones? Yeah. Don't you have all sorts of weird views about frog people? Well, no, right. And it's like, I think I'm going to talk to somebody a little less out there than you, and walk away.
So always put them on the defense is kind of your point, I guess, right?
Yeah. Don't go down their rabbit hole, and don't feel like you have to defend positions which they claim that you take, right? Call a spade and laugh at them when they try and set fires.
Well, maybe we should have a class for Republicans. Hey, you know what? My name is Duff. I'm going to teach you guys how to actually debate correctly and always get a win. Maybe we should start giving away those lessons and that kind of thing.
Oh, but see, AAA, this is the terrible thing. I don't always want the Republicans to win. I want both sides to win on the things that they're good at, because I think that between the two parties, you can have a lot of good things. And what's really missing is a lack of communication between the parties, because they do offer one another aspects of a picture which the other side is missing. It's just that we want the nature of the system to be cordial enough to allow for that, and currently it isn't.
No, that's fair. And let me rephrase. I would want a, here is the best way to debate. Okay, go talk to Duff. Maybe that's what I should say. So yeah, I think that, because there are ones that I don't mind. So that'd be, hey, you know what? I think that's, if that were the case, would you do that? Would you mind coaching people on how to be better debaters, thinkers, what have you?
Well, if they're willing to pay me for skills which I clearly do not have, then who am I to say no?
So you're asking for a job to be paid a large sum of money from people who don't know you and you don't know them, and you want them to pay you for things that you don't know about. Sounds like you're trying to be a senator, but okay. Yeah, yes, that was a little cynical, but I think you.
Hey, I didn't say that, AAA. You did.
Well, sometimes the truth hurts, and that's just how the truth kind of goes. That's the best. It is literally the blind leading the blind, questioning the. That's the trying to have the admittance of, oh, you know what, you don't know what you're doing, which was, I think one of the best. I liked one of the shows with Ben Shapiro. He talked about the scariness of going from being a child to being an adult. Is, as a child, you go, okay, I don't know much, but I'll learn it eventually. And as a teenager, you go, I still don't know a lot of things. And the scariness is once you know, you still don't know a lot of things. And people just go, "Oh yeah, when you know, you'll learn the things." And is there ever a time where you finally learn that thing? Maybe not. So it's just a very I don't know if you saw that episode, but I think it was very telling about it's scary how much we don't know. It's also scary how much we won't know. I don't know if you saw that episode, but that was interesting. I don't know if you did that make sense?
I don't know if I've seen that particular episode, but no, it is one of those things where if I were to put a slight tweak on what you say,
Sure,
what you
go
said
for
there
it.
is when it comes to things that we don't know, or that in this case, things we can't do, what we can't do can overwhelm us, right? And when it comes to the things that we do know, there can be a certain amount of cynicism that can arise from that, and that can overwhelm us too. And so you have to negotiate the place between those two things to the best of your ability and create tools to help you with it. So, for example, facetiously, if I were to sell a product of teaching people how to debate, one of the things I would want to do is engage in several debates, take information, see what works, and try and figure out how you could go about debating so that you could make that big, scary thing less scary. However, at a certain point, you're never going to be able to erase all of the potential unknowns that you could be attacked by. It's about gaining the confidence and also the comfortability with being able to survive those things which you don't know. Or at least, does that make sense in the context of what you were saying there, AAA?
Yeah, well, that's always because in a debate, how I've always learned to debate is go in when when you're new to it. I've always been taught that okay, when you're new to debating, you go into it and say, here's a topic, here are two topics. You don't really care about either topics. You're going to debate this side. Come back the next day, you're going to debate the next side to see where you are going right, going wrong, and go to debate things which you don't really care. That way, you can come and be as objective as possible, learn some facts, and then okay, I'm going to be for and against whatever else. So when you do go to something you actually care about, you have the tools to, hey, you know what, I know where to start from, where you're coming from, how we're both going to dance about this, and kind of go from there. Again, that's how I was introduced to the whole style. I don't know how does that kind of make sense to what I was talking about?
Um, so yeah, I think the limitation which we're talking about. So in terms of what Ben Shapiro was saying about being frightened by the things you don't know, and also by the things which you end up knowing, um, when it comes to debate, you have to make sure that if you're going to practice by arguing the opposite side, you also need to argue or become fluent in what is strong about that side and what is weak about that side. Because oftentimes what it devolves into is you just sort of argue what you think is about that side. And there's certain stances or ideologies which just don't work well in particular contexts. And sometimes it's more important to point out that this doesn't work in that context. And I acknowledge that this is where you're trying to push me because of that. So you have to be aware enough of the strengths and limitations of whatever side you're doing to be able to know when you should give ground and where you can take ground. And that's an entirely different thing that's quite tough to do.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I don't know. Have you had any I guess we'll call it training with debating, Duff?
I was a member of the high school debate club,
Oh my.
and I have done a little bit of teaching with regards to debate. So yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Interesting. Well, and not to go down the giant rabbit hole, but I'm just curious now. We can touch that before we go. I guess so. My question is to you then: how were you taught? And then my other question is: how do you now teach it?
So you have to break it into a couple different categories. One, how do you go about dissecting a topic or an issue, right? So you want to talk about things like what is known, what are underlying assumptions, and what are those underlying assumptions contingent upon? Because oftentimes what you need to go after are the underlying assumptions on one side or the other. But those are not always obvious if you're arguing a particular topic, right? So, for example, if we're talking about wage gap, or a difference in wage earnings between two groups. So on the face of it, people would say it's absolutely terrible that there is a discrepancy between these two groups. All groups should be the same. Well, there's a couple underlying assumptions that are going on there. A, everybody works equally hard. B, that given a choice, these people would all choose the best option possible. And C, that wage is actually the thing which people are most interested in when it comes to work. Now, none of those things are necessarily true. So if you're going to attack the position, you want to know those underlying assumptions. The other thing you want to know is where you can actually offer things to learn more about what the other side actually believes. So in a debate, it's often more important to understand the debater than it is to understand the topic. And so anytime you can give the other side an opportunity to elaborate on their thinking, you want to listen to what they say, and like a good interviewer in your rebuttal, give it back to them. So what do you mean when you say this? Oh, when you said this, you meant that, right? And then you can start taking apart what they're saying. So oftentimes in debate, it's not the topic at hand that will, knowledge of the topic at hand, which will give you the edge. It's the knowledge of underlying assumptions, how the other side formulates their arguments, and whether or not you can catch the other side making logical errors that you can make plain for everybody to see.
Interesting. And then, I'm sorry, was that how you were taught or how you teach now?
That's how I teach it.
Oh, okay. Well, does that differ a lot from how you were taught?
Oh, yeah. So the way you're generally taught, because oftentimes it's an after-school club in high school, teachers kind of tired. They go, oh, you just need to know the other side, right? And argue positions which you don't hold. And it's like, but what about the other sides? What about the other sides make them compelling? What are the underlying assumptions? How do they work? That's harder to get into. And sometimes it's hard to get into because the instructor may not be quite as open to having differing points of view within a club. But that's not always the case. You don't want to broad brush, because you need to introduce people with baby steps. However, this assumption that you immediately have to argue the other side as put is actually very limiting, and it doesn't actually give the developing debater much to work with.
Interesting. And so, do you still teach now or no?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that.
I see. Well, I can't debate you there. I don't have enough information to tell you whether or not you're lying to me, but okay. No, that'd be a interesting. I think you made very, very good points with trying to get underlying things. So it sounds like, though, as long as you and your opponents know the specific definitions of what you're arguing, then it can be easier and to make sure you're both making good points, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to just give a blanket statement. Okay, I think that pineapples and pizzas go together. Okay, you're wrong for these reasons. So as long as everyone is defined on the same page, usually things can at least start out correctly. I guess that's where you want to go.
Ideally. So essentially, you're approaching the debate process authentically, and you're actually willing to grant positions. So meaning that it's like someone says, this is the definition that we're using, and you go, yes, that's the definition that we're using, and you actually use that definition. You don't start redefining it or throwing different connotations. And that's where oftentimes the difference between a debate and something which is sold as a debate becomes very, very obvious. And if anyone actually wants to take a look at some good debates done well and according to proper process, go over to Oxford Union, the Oxford Union channel, and you can watch some fabulous debates with quite a few intellectuals over there that actually follow the appropriate proceedings. Yeah.
Interesting. And what are you qualifying as appropriate proceedings?
So meaning there's a structure to most debates. in terms of how much time you get to talk about your particular issue. You introduce it, you open it for counter questioning, you let the other side go, then you open it for counter questioning, and you basically go back and forth, and there are rounds and essentially scoring, right? So it doesn't become, you did this and you said that. It's like, no, because that doesn't actually get you anywhere. And in fact, that can often lead to different types of logical fallacies. Whereas if you actually set it up and you follow the structure of the debate, which is usually opening statements, followed by questioning, followed by secondary statements, followed by other questioning, and then eventually closing statements, it becomes a lot clearer as to who's arguing in good faith, what's actually being talked about, whether they understand one another or not.
Okay. Actually, along with that, I know that on YouTube there's a channel called Intelligence Squared, and they have a very similar. I think it's a coin flip. An announcer says, "Here's the debate," and then a coin flip says, "Okay, this person will talk for 5 minutes, giving the pro, 5 minutes giving the con, and then after that happens, there's 2 minutes of rebuttal and then 30 seconds of back and forthness, which I enjoy. At the same time, I also do enjoy the because if I were to do a debate, I think it'd be interesting to have the I kind of prefer the back and forth over the here's your time and stuff, and then you should be able to go on, but it would be interesting to have the only downside I see too. Here's my opening debate at 5 minutes long. As a listener, I go, okay, there's 10 million points you're going to give out, and then as the contrary to say, okay, I'm going to go and make sure I hit all these points. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So it would be interesting, I think, to say, okay, here's my debate. Here's 2 points. Okay, great. Here's the other side. They say, okay, well, I'm going to debate those 2 points, and then debate those two to an extent, and say, okay, you know what, Gray, we're going to say we think that XYZ side is correct. On to the next point. And granted, it's more back and forth, and maybe there's less talking there because there's a lot of times where I see, okay, well, hang on, that's wrong. So you go, oh, no, and then again, they just kind of keep going with it. So again, the version I'm thinking of is very back and forth, but I guess I feel as though there's too much lost maybe in certain structures, if that makes sense.
Essentially, so that's more of a structured discussion. And a lot of that comes down to whether or not they're willing to respect each other's interjections or willing to respect the moderator. So a very bad example of that would be the debate between Roaming Millennial and Vegan Gains 2 years ago now.
Yeah, I remember that one well.
With Blair White, I think was the moderator, because the moderator couldn't actually stop the conversation. And neither side was particularly willing to grant the other side a position without becoming very heated, right? And that's not to say like one side won the debate, one side lost the debate. It was just a very poor example of how a debate or even a structured discussion could go, right? As opposed to some of the stuff which Dave Rubin has done, where he's had people on different sides speaking to one another. So, for example, when he was talking about Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, well, that was a structured discussion, but they both respected Dave. As opposed to, what was the one where Dave was moderating between Blair White and
Candace Owens?
Yeah, that was a train wreck and a half.
Yeah, I didn't, and I didn't. I think that was the day where I talked to you, and I said, okay, she's not that bad. And you're like, yeah, she has her issues, and I will say I didn't believe you because I go, oh, she's awesome. I saw her, and then I go, okay, this is weird. And then she had a interview with Joe Rogan. I'm like, oh, I wanted to like you. And I still like her, but like, she is to be fair, I think sometimes she's given a bit. She is just this thought, the next thinker, and I'm like, she has her moments, and they're she's okay. I guess is that fair to say? Maybe on your end, she tried.
So, in terms of alternate voices coming, or at least critics from an African or an African American perspective, I far prefer the Canadian equivalent, which is a YouTuber named My Name is Josephine, as well as a Jamaican immigrant, now I think landed citizen of the United States, called Just Thinking Out Loud, because I find that they're less into brand building than Candace is. And so Candace seems to adopt the position that all news is good news. So she will make rather incendiary statements for no apparent reason other than to make them incendiary, because you'll get more clicks. And then contradictory things like saying, "Oh, they play the race card," and then there's been instances where Candace has basically been like, "You shouldn't really question me on this because I have lived experience as a conservative Black American woman," and it's like, that's playing the race card. So she doesn't necessarily.
Not always consistent.
Sorry, go ahead.
Not always consistent.
She's not always consistent, and she doesn't extend the same. She doesn't extend the same sort of privileges within the conversation to others that she claims for herself, and that turns her, to my mind, more into sort of a hackneyed plot and someone who's selling a brand, as opposed to someone who's trying to understand a larger concept. But she clearly has her audience, so good for her.
Well, and like I said, she tries. Not the biggest fans. I'd love to have her on the show, of course, but I do think that it's like, oh, she's just amazing. She's a thought leader, and I'm like, Jordan Peterson's a thought leader. Ben Shapiro might be a thought leader. Candace Owens says stuff, and sometimes I agree, and sometimes I just kind of go, oh, yep, okay, you can have your thoughts and things. So, yes, that did not go as well as predicted, but anyway, I like the fact that we got to end on a not crazy world on fire note. That's good news. I hope that everyone there can go to is this just the Oxford YouTube channel there, Duff, or
it's called the Oxford Union.
Okay. So guys, if you want to go and see some decent debates there, and I'm guessing they use, I take it they've done several debates with other, and is this students, teachers, speakers that do this, or?
All of the above.
Oh, okay, great. And sorry, I guess I should look at the channel. So go there, find the stuff. There's also, like I said, a structured debate flow in Intelligence Squared. They have some interesting debates there and that kind of thing. So everyone, if you want to go and make your arguments better, go to those places. I'm sure there are more out there that can be had and stuff, but make sure you're always prepared. Anyway, we're going over a little time here, but I think we can. I hope that there is more positive things will be happening in November. Hopefully, we can smart decisions will be made, and the truth will come out about certain people. But any words of wisdom or maybe optimistic thoughts there to end, Duff?
Well, daylight savings time is coming around, so we'll have an extra hour to sleep.
That is true, and for anyone else who loves it, it dropped about 40 degrees right here in the U.S. where I'm in Ohio. So yeah, I'm freezing my behind off, and as previously discussed, I had to due to other power outages, I am now not in my apartment right now. But yeah, so it is getting colder. I'm guessing is it very cold where you are there, Duff?
Oh, it's a balmy 12 degrees.
Oh wow, okay. I'm only at 50, 40, but we're going into fall, so I'm freezing my butt off. But anyway, hope you guys are enjoying the weather, or if not enjoying it, then getting to a warmer or colder spot, whatever your purview. But anyway, it's been fun to have this discussion. Hopefully things get better, or at least don't get as crazy, but fingers crossed, who knows what will happen there. Anyway, guys, we will bring you more news next time. So until next week, you guys have a great night, and we'll keep it coming. So say goodbye there, Duff.
Have a good one, everyone.
And hopefully we'll see you next week or the next time. So guys, be safe out there. All right, thanks.